Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Swartwood. I am here tonight with a very exciting guest. It is the author of Hidden Pictures, The Impossible Fortress, which was actually nominated for the Edgar Award, and his upcoming novel, The Last One at the Wedding. His work has been translated into over 30 languages. I didn't even know there were over 30 languages. How about that? And for many years, he was the publisher at Quirk Books, an independent press where he acquired and edited multiple New York Times bestsellers. That's right. It's your favorite writer and mine, Jason Rekulak. Hey, did I pronounce that correctly, Jason?
Perfectly.
Okay.
Perfectly.
I thought I was going to mess that up. In my head, I've been saying it wrong for the longest time. And then I listened to the audiobook recently of Impossible Fortress, and I'm like, that's how you say it.
Yeah. No, it's a funny thing. It's Ukrainian, and so no one in America knows how to pronounce it. Everyone mispronounces it. But this past summer, I went to Spain. Everyone there pronounced it perfectly, flawlessly. I would check into hotels. They'd be like, "Mr. Rikulik, welcome." No issue at all. So it's just not a very common last name at all. The only people I know who have it are in my family.
Right.
Uh, but
Well, we are here tonight to talk about obviously your most recent book, which was, Hidden Pictures, which is just, all over the place. Everywhere you go, you see it. They won the Goodreads award, which quite honestly, I don't think there's no like like how movies and TVs will have People's Choice Awards. I feel like books don't really have like a Reader's Choice Award, so I think Goodreads is the closest that there is to that. So that's huge. You won the Goodreads award for that. So we're going to talk about Hidden Pictures. If we have time, maybe we can talk a little bit about your upcoming book that's coming out this fall, or at least get a little bit of a sneak preview. But anybody who watches this knows I always want to kind of go back way and kind of the beginning, kind of build up. Before that, though, do you remember how we met? Because it's kind of a funny. I don't know. I think it's like a really weird story, quite honestly.
I feel like, well, I used to be the publisher of a small independent press in Philadelphia called Quirk Books. And I think you pitched something to us. And I remember liking your writing. I was like, wow, this guy can really write. The writing is really clean, which you don't actually see a lot of. Like, I would read a lot of books. I'd get, you know, not hundreds of submissions a day, but dozens. And you had this style that was like super, super clean, which is a really rare thing. So I don't remember exactly what happened because it was probably 10 years ago, but I feel like I
I
might
feel
have
like it was almost longer than that.
said, I really like what you're doing. And I think the particular book you were pitching wasn't right for us, but I liked what you were writing. And I wanted to see if maybe there was a chance we could work on something, which is what I did there all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
always,
So this is what happened.
okay,
I had written this novel. It was like a non-traditional kind of like superhero type thing. It was like a Watchmen meets Jason Bourne or something like that. And at that time, I was between agents, which, us writers know is a euphemism for, basically not having a current agent. And so at that time, we have mutual friends, Joseph Dagnice and Denise Kiernan. Joe, I was talking to him at one point and I said, do you think this is a book that maybe, that like Quirk Books might like? Cause it's a little bit, it's kind of thriller, but it has a little bit of blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, just send it to him. The worst they can say is no. He said, tell Jason. I said, send to Jason. Say, tell him I sent you, whatever else. So I sent an email. I said, Joseph Dagnice suggested I send you, blah blah blah. And I want to say, like within a day, almost immediately, you were like, yeah, sounds interesting. Send me the full manuscript. So I sent it to you, and I think it was like a day or two later, you had responded, and it was a pass. You're just like, this isn't really quite right. But I like the writing. I see you're in Pennsylvania. If you ever have time to do like a phone call or something like that, maybe blah blah blah. I happened for my day job to be down in the Philadelphia area. It was well right outside, and I had met another writer friend in Manayuk. We were having lunch, and when your email came in, and I was like, okay, well this is interesting. I was like, I'm actually in Philly now. Like, should I just tell him like I'm actually in Philly? And so I
yeah,
did. It was this weird thing. And I was like, well, I'm actually in Philly right now for my day job. If you have any time, I'd be happy to just stop by and hang out. And you were like, Sure. So it was the weirdest
That's
thing,
how
and I
we did it. And it was great. It was wonderful because it was a small press and it was super, it was just like real life. There was no like pretension about it. There's a writer that I published. He was not published before I started publishing him, and now he does books for Little Brown. His name is Ben Winters. Do you know Ben Winters?
oh
Uh,
yeah, The Last
I
Policeman.
met
Yeah, the
him.
recent book come out.
Locking
Yeah.
up, I was locking up my bicycle. That's how I met Ben Winters. I was locking up my bicycle, and he had an apartment across the street. And he said, "Is this a publishing house?" And I was locking up my bike to the front of the building. And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, I'm a writer." And I said, "Great, tell me more." I love that job. It was fantastic. I met because we were small. We couldn't compete with Simon and Schuster. We were never going to be able to pay $100,000 or let alone $1 million for a book. Although I did once, um, but um, generally we had to keep the advances pretty low because we had no backlist. And so I was always looking for uh, talented writers, and often what you would find is you'd find that someone who knew how to write, but they hadn't really thought about their career. They didn't have like a vehicle for their talent. And I felt like that's where I had an opportunity because if I could pair someone who was good at something with a commercial kind of book, then I could at least launch their career. And then what happened invariably every time is that once they blew up and became best-selling authors, suddenly every agent in the world wanted to represent them, and they would take the author and move them to one of the New York publishers who would shower them with millions of dollars and whatever. Um, so that was a little frustrating, but in hindsight, I still look back on it and with like really good memories. It was a really fun job, and I loved it. And I loved meeting people and talking to different writers. It's very
Yeah, I
social.
mean, you mentioned Ben Winters, who actually now I think is show running the Jeffrey Deaver show Tracker for CBS now.
He had a new book
You
last month with Little Brown, and he has a show on CBS. It premiered after the Super Bowl.
yeah. And then also, yeah, Ransom Riggs, right? Grady Hendrix,
Yeah, he was a big one.
Steven, completely, yeah, but the one, the Pride and well, so okay, yeah, let's go back to, oh yeah, but then just to cap off the story, I stopped by the Cork office. I just come in and I'm like, I'm seriously here to see Jason. And you took me up to your office and we were just kind of like chatting in your office for like an hour, trying to brainstorm different things. It was such a surreal thing. I mean, yeah, nothing really kind of ever came of it, unfortunately. And I don't think you were really there much longer before you basically
Oh, that's
left
right.
and then
Yeah,
kind
you
of
came in
started.
for the end. I left in like 2018, I think. I was there
Yeah.
I was there for 18 years,
Yeah.
2000 to
Well, let's start about kind of the beginning. How did you even get, like how did the whole Cork Books thing even come about?
Yeah, well, I could talk for an hour about Quirk. I mean, the the short answer is that there's a writer named David Borgenecht. He had written a book that was sort of an unexpected bestseller um, in, I guess this would have been in 1999, called The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. Do you remember that book? It was like a nonfiction book. It
Faintly.
told you how to fight a crocodile, how to escape from quicksand. And they interviewed like crocodile handlers, like if you had to fight a crocodile, what would you do? All these things you see in action movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the book told you how to do those things. Massive bestseller. Uh, I, I don't even know what the number is. It's like 10 million plus. It had the great benefit of pubbing right as Survivor went on TV. So like survival stuff was just kind of like everywhere. Also, Castaway had just hit theaters. So like the timing of it was just perfect. And he decided he was going to take the money that he earned from that book and start his own publishing house, which would be called Quirk Books. And the idea was that I think because the worst case scenario survival handbook had been so successful, his plan was to just continue to do like irreverent reference books. And a friend of mine had gone to work for him, and she quickly, convinced him to hire me. Um, so it was very much like a startup at the time when everyone was doing internet startups. This was like a publishing startup, like right around 99, 2000. And unfortunately, it was sort of like the worst time to start a publishing house based on reference books, because the internet was just starting to like rise, like in its ascendancy, and sort of render most reference books obsolete. You know, like the internet did a real number on like photos and cliff notes and all these other things that people would use for reference. People stopped looking for books for that kind of information. They started looking at the internet. And so, to condense this story into a really short timeline, we spent a couple years trying to like work on reference books as like the market for reference books was eroding. Um, and we got to a point where in 2008 where the finances were actually looking pretty dire. We're like, how are we going to make this work? Like, nothing we're doing is working. Uh, and which was actually, I mean, it could have been a disaster, but it actually turned out to be a really good thing, because suddenly there was this willingness to like, well, let's try anything. And I'd always been interested in fiction, like, and I had all these ideas that I wanted to do with novels and things that were kind of experimental. And the first one that we ever tried was, I had this idea for again, you have to remember, like, our finances were in the toilet. We had no money. And so I was like, well, what if we took a public domain text? What if we took a book that was free, like Pride and Prejudice, and we just paid a writer to add zombies to it? We don't have to pay him to write a full book. The book is written. Jane Austen wrote it. We just have to pay him to write, to add like 10,000 words with zombie scenes. It'll only take him like 6 weeks, you know, and that was our first novel, and that became like, we were all just sort of like blindsided, because that book, it's old news now. I mean, it was 2009, but in its time, it kind of like blew up the internet. People went nuts, and um, so then people looked to me and they said, okay, well, what other kind of novels are we going to do? And I was like, well, we'll do a couple more of those, but everyone started ripping it off immediately.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
HarperCollins.
I remember. I remember seeing other ones.
It was shameless. I was shocked. I didn't realize just how many copycats there were. But around the same time, I'd met this guy, Ransom Riggs, who had this collection of photographs, and he collected these weird found photos that he found in like swap meets and things like that. And he had this idea to do a book of them, just of his favorite found photos. And I was like, well, I don't know about that. I don't know if we would do an art book. And then we narrowed it down to just the photos of weird kids. Because he had a big collection of just photos of weird kids from like, the early 1900s. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a cool book. And that, over like a year of like talking about what could this book be with these photos of weird kids, he kept adding more and more text to it. First, it was going to be like little captions or little Edward Gorey kind of poems. And then at some point I said, look, I think you want this to be a novel. I think all these kids, there's a story about all these kids. They all live together. You need to write that novel. And that was even a bigger success. I mean, that book, the last time I checked, that book was like 15 million. I mean, it's like a ridiculous number. And so then suddenly we became a fiction publisher, like by that point, that was 2011. So I'm like, okay, now we're publishing fiction and some nonfiction. And that was great for me, because that's kind of where my interests always were anyway. I was sort of doing the publishing stuff just to pay the bills and keep food
Yeah.
on my table.
Well, and again, I mean, like you said, we could spend an hour probably talking about this because, of course, there's Grady Hendrix, and I know that you had, I think it was your idea with for a horror store, and then and that how it kind of came about. And thinking about it now with Quirk, for anybody who's familiar with a lot of Quirk books, they were quirky. I mean, especially not even kind of like what you were publishing, but just the designs, the overall designs. Like when we were talking about our mutual friend Dwayne Swarzynski, he had published one about drinking where the book was actually a coaster in a way. So was there any book where you guys almost like, how do I want to say it? The concept for the book was almost too grand, where there was just like, we really want to try this, but it was just like, there's just no way we can make this work. Does anything come to mind?
No, I mean, I'm looking at my shelf here to see if I have one I can show you. I mean, we would do anything. The craziest thing we ever did. This is the craziest, nuttiest idea, and I didn't even think we could do this because everyone who came into I thought it was so obscene, we wouldn't be able to sell it in stores. This book went on to sell. Last I checked, this was 6 years ago. 6 years ago, it was at 300,000 copies. It's probably more than that now. But when I first got it in the mail, I said, we could never do this. It's so disgusting. But everybody who would come in my office would ask to borrow it. They'd be like, I want to take this home. I want to show my wife. I want to show my husband. And when that happens, you're like, okay, people normally are not that interested in anything I'm working on. And so it was this really funny book. I'm gonna show it to you. I'll hold it up to you. It was called Penis Pokey. Now you can see there's a hole in the middle, right? And so the idea with this book is that you, the user, the reader, you could complete these illustrations at home, right? So there's a hot dog, a banana, it goes on and on, right? And so again, like you call the printer and you're like, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to do a board book, like a children's board book, but it's definitely not for kids. And I need a hole in the middle. And they're like, well, how big of a hole do you want? And I'm like, well, I don't know, something like this.
That is fantastic.
We do stuff like that all the time. It was really fun. That book, 300,000 copies sold, mostly at Urban Outfitters. They back when they sold books. I don't know if people know this chain. I mean, it's pretty popular where I am in Philly. They're headquartered in Philadelphia, so I know Urban Outfitters. Do you know Urban Outfitters? They do
Yeah.
mostly clothing and apparel. They don't sell
Yeah.
as many books as they used to, but back in the day, circa that's probably 2006, they still sold a ton of books.
Did you guys also do, or maybe it's another publisher, but it was a very similar idea. What was that? The nursery rhyme, like go to fuck to sleep.
No, we didn't do that. That guy, I passed on that book.
Mm.
No, wait, no, I didn't pass on Go the Fuck to Sleep. I passed on P is for Pterodactyl. I'm mixing them up. They're both picture children board books. I didn't pass on Go the Fuck to Sleep. But yeah, that was another really big one. And I think we would have done it if it had come into us, but it didn't.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, like you said, we spent a lot of time on that. I don't want to spend too much more time, but you were there, you said, for 16 years.
18.
Were you, or oh God, 18 years. Were you writing? You know what? I was taking that from your bio, I think, from Hidden Pictures, which did come out 2 years ago. So, you were writing during this time, right? I mean, at what point did you decide, or not necessarily decide, but I mean, at what point did you realize, oh, you know what, this is something I want to do? I really enjoy writing. Was that something in high school, college? I mean, at what point did you start really dabbling, just writing in general?
Sure. I mean, I was always writing. I've been writing every day pretty much since I was like 19 or 20. Um, so all through Quirk, I was writing. Um, I have so many, half finished and completely finished but failed novels like under my bed. I can't even tell you how many I have. Six, eight, something like that. So all through that job, as I was doing it, I mean, it was a job, you know. Um, the crazy thing is that I found that like I was actually good at it, and I really liked it. Like I it's a really social job, and so I actually look back on it with a great deal of fondness because I kind of miss it. Part of me misses being around all these really creative people, all these really great people, designers, editors, writers. Um, now I'm a writer. I work by myself, you know, alone a lot of the times. So I was always writing with a goal of leaving my day job, and now that I've left it behind, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know, you know, in a different world, if I had to like keep that job for the rest of my life, I think I still would have been happy. It was pretty great.
Yeah. I mean, writing definitely, is a very isolating thing. When you were just there with your computer, or, sometimes if you even write pad. I mean, do you write with a computer, or I know some people write longhand?
Yeah, I write longhand and I type it in.
Okay,
Um,
interesting. So, and I talked to another author about this. Then your first draft is longhand. So in many ways, when you're going back then, Is it almost like your second draft, like you are kind of revising as you are doing your second draft when you're, from the longhand?
A little bit. I mean, I tend to do like 100 drafts. Like I don't have like distinct numbers for like how I count them. Like I'm always like revising and rewriting things. I write a lot more than I use. I try different things. For the book that I have coming out in the fall, it's 100,000 words, but I'm sure I wrote 500,000. You know what I mean? Like I was just like writing a shitload of things and just I wish I had a more efficient process. I really do. I don't know. I don't know how to. I'm thinking about it right now because I'm like, is there a way to work more efficiently? Like, do I need to write 500,000 words to get to 100,000? But everybody has their own,
Sometimes. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Everybody has a different thing.
and every book is different. Um, so I don't know if I can change the way I work. Um, but uh,
I mean, it really comes down to just whatever works for you.
right.
Um, well, let me ask you this. So The Impossible Fortress was your first novel. That one was about three teenage boys in the 1980s. They set out on a seemingly impossible task to steal the issue of Playboy featuring Vanna White. This was your first published novel, but this was not your first novel, or was it your first
No,
first
no,
novel?
no, it's probably like my seventh novel that like I'd written. Um, Seventh,
W-
eighth, I don't even know.
Had you tried the previous novels? Like, had you tried getting those published?
No, I mean, some of them I did and some I didn't. Sometimes I would know, I think sometimes I would just know something was no good. You know what I mean? And I would just be
Yeah.
like, I don't think this works. I'm not happy with it. I don't, and I'm, I mean, one of the nice things about being an editor is like I was really tough on people because I had to be, because the books had to make money. They had to be commercially viable. So I'd be really critical of things that came in, but then I applied that same eye to like myself. And anytime I would write something, um, I wouldn't send it out just because I finished, which is what a lot of people do. A lot of people they get to 80,000 words and like, well, I wrote a book. Um, and I think I had enough experience by that point to say, well, yes, you did, but you didn't necessarily write a story that is satisfying or that completely works. So I would shove a lot of things under my bed. Um, but when I finished Impossible Fortress, I was like, well, I think this might work. I don't, and that book wasn't even a huge success, but I think, you know, I know it resonates with it. I still get letters from people, like maybe like once a month I'll get an email from somebody who's like read it, who like, if you were a teenager in the 1980s, like that book I think works for you. Um,
Yeah, I wasn't a teenager in the 80s. I was born in the beginning of the 80s, but I really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook. I mentioned to you this before we started recording. The narrator you had, Griffin Newman, I think he did a really great job. I don't know if he seems to be an actor or something, but it's a very unique story. It, is I wouldn't call it a YA story, but it's kind of a young adult. I mean, how did the publisher market it? I mean, they didn't market it as a YA, correct?
they struggled with how to market it. I mean, the funny thing is, I thought of it as a heist novel because they are trying to steal this illicit magazine with Vanna White, which is just absurd. Like it's just the most absurd MacGuffin. And people would reach out to me and be like, "Did you have like a Vanna White obsession in high school?" And of course, I didn't. Although that magazine was a really big deal, nobody remembers. Like if you're
Oh, I had
old
to
enough,
Google it. I had to be like, I wasn't sure if you made that up. So I had to Google it. And it's like, nope, it's real.
it's deal. But if you see it, and I have several copies because I've been gifted it by many people. They find it on eBay and they send it to me as a joke. It looks like CBS at 9 o'clock. I swear to God, like these pictures, she's she's just wearing underwear. But it was a big deal in 1987, you know? And so I thought it was really funny that like these boys would be so obsessed that they would break into a store and plan this elaborate heist. So I read every heist novel I could get my hands on. I read like all the Donald Westlake heist novels, like the Hot Rock. Um, any kind of book where someone's trying to steal a jewel from a museum and trying to like sort of use all of those tropes from like heist novels in a story about 1980s teenagers that felt kind of like, a John Hughes movie or something. And
Yeah.
this was all before Stranger Things. It's before like the 80s Renaissance that actually happened in like popular culture. Um, and so the publisher was like, yeah, they were flummoxed. They were like, well, how do we market this? They're like, we like this, but is it, it's about teenagers, but it's not, it's really meant for people who sort of lived through it.
Right.
Teenagers are going to approach it and see it as like historical fiction. For them, it might as well be the Red Badge of Courage. They can't even relate to it, you know? Um, so it didn't do, it did fine, but it didn't do that well. Like I remember I went to, I would go to like events. They tried, they sent me everywhere. They sent me down. I did an event in North Carolina and there were 3 people there. I did an event at Powell's Books, which is a big legendary bookstore in Oregon, in Portland. There was one guy there, but I think he was just like there at the store anyway, and he just like sat down because he was tired, you know? Um, so it was not a big success. But um, but nevertheless I do hear from people occasionally who read the book who like it. And
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I really liked it. And it was funny. I had jotted down here. I had heist novel, but I also found it to be kind of like a quest novel, if that's even a thing. Because I mean, you have the boys, obviously, they're doing the heist with the Playboy, but it's also kind of a quest because then later we find out the main character is also doing the quest with, going to, I don't want to spoil anything for people who are reading it, but, later in the book, kind of the quest with, going up the mountain and everything else. And it kind of plays into just the idea of the Invisible Fortress, which of course is a game that the main character designs, which you actually like. You can play that game. I don't know the exact game that maybe you pictured in your head, but if you go to your website or if anybody goes to Jason's website, you can actually play. And there was a couple minutes. I didn't have much time today, but I did play a little bit of the game that like you can actually play on your computer.
you
It
can
was really
play the
fun.
game that they made in the book. Yeah, and that was really, I got really excited when I had that idea because I mean the book is actually, there's a lot of stuff in that book that I had thought I was going to be a computer programmer in high school. Like all that stuff about computer programming and Billy and Mary was, pretty drawn from real life. And the big surprise in that book, which I won't spoil, but you know what I'm talking about, like the big reveal in that book, that you find out when he goes to the convent to confront
Yeah.
Mary. That is something that really happened to me. And it's something that no one can believe it when I tell them the story. They're like, well, how did you not know? How were you friends with this person for so long and you didn't know? We're trying to be cagey and like vague about this because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read the book. But the truth of the matter is, I just had no idea. I just had no idea. And so I always wanted to write about how this really crazy thing could happen to me and how I could be really close friends with someone and not realize something about this person and then have the scales fall from my eyes.
Yeah.
And so all that is and so it was a very autobiographical book in the way that none of my other books have been ever since.
So what about his two friends? Were they similar to friends that you had had?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Even the one with the claw?
Well, I did not have a friend with a claw. He had another issue, but
Okay.
I
There was some
changed.
type of
You know,
yeah.
people who read these things and you don't want them to
Yeah,
get upset.
absolutely. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but yeah, it's a great book for anybody who hasn't. If you've read Hidden Pictures, and that's the thing too, just in terms of, I guess we'll call it range. Well, because Impossible Fortress is completely different from Hidden Pictures. I mean, not only is it a completely different type of book. I mean, you have a young male narrator, whereas opposed with Hidden Pictures, which we're going to get into, is a young female narrator. Both written in first person, although the tenses are a little bit different. Which I guess let's kind of like maybe. Well, first of all, before we move away from Impossible Fortress, every chapter, which I listened to the audiobook, so at first hearing just the code. So you start every chapter with like these lines of code. And in terms of the audiobook for the first chapter or two, I remember kind of like, hitting the 30 plus to kind of just get past them because I'm like, oh, come on. But then I realized after a couple chapters, you have to listen to them because really they like are about, I mean, it was very clever on how you did it in that they were um basically what was going on with the story or what was going to happen with that chapter because it is the main character basically building this game with the code of what's happening or whatever else. So you being a coder, I mean, how true to life were those codes?
Well, I mean, they were. It's funny. It works much better in print than in audio. It doesn't work in audio at all. And they struggled with like, how are we going to treat this? Because there are these blocks of computer code that I was including in the book more as like a graphic than as text. I wasn't really intending anyone to read them because your eye can just sort of like scroll over them. But the first two lines, there usually is some kind of thematic connection to like what's happening in the story. Um, the well, my initial idea for that book was to program the entire Impossible Fortress game in BASIC for Commodore 64 and put the whole code in the book. And that's a really bad idea because nobody remembers what programming in BASIC on a Commodore 64 is. And so I came up with this sort of compromise where it was like, well, I will have excerpts from a theoretical game, um, and that is actually what is in the book. And then we actually at one point I thought about having the game be faithful to what a game would be like back then, but we realized no, this is too boring. Like you don't want to play those games anymore. They're so. It's like when you go to an arcade and you play Space Invaders. It's sort of fun for like a minute, and then you're like, Jesus, this is really it's kind of boring. Um, so even with the game that we created for the website, I said to the developer, I couldn't even do it because now he's programming in like what do you use? It wasn't Java. Um, it might have been like C. Um, I said, look, just make it look like a game from that era, but use every tool at your disposal to make it fun and interesting to play.
And so from Impossible Fortress, obviously their next book was Hidden Pictures. Before we talk about that, though, I want to go back to earlier this year when I was talking to Paul Tremblay. He had been a short story editor for like a magazine, and we had talked about, and I had done the same, and we talked about how reading Slush really helped us as writers to basically see bad writing. And I think you kind of had the same thing happening with a publisher, although I'm assuming you probably didn't see as much bad stuff happening because oftentimes maybe a lot of stuff came in from agents who kind of sort through all the bad stuff before it gets to the publisher. But did you find that though, being the fiction editor, and you kind of touched on this a little bit before, with that really helped you as a writer to really know how to craft the book, one that was commercial or marketable, but also just in terms of maybe structure, in terms of just the writing, how to really kind of grab the reader from that first chapter.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with us, the problem with being at Quirk was that like we didn't have the infrastructure set up to like sort of launch an author, which a lot of like big publishers do. Like if you sell your book to Knopf, they have the connections. They can get your book into like the Read with Jenna book club or the Reese Witherspoon book club or the more like highbrow literary circles. They can get the reviews in the New York Times Book Review. We didn't have any of that stuff. All we had were ideas that were super like high concept and catchy and commercial. So I would turn down good books all the time. And there are many people who have like careers now who like probably submitted their first novels to me, and I passed on it not because it wasn't good, but because I knew we would not be able to make it successful because it just wasn't it. We had to make it work with like the title and the cover and the concept. That we could do that. And there's a lot of good books that like don't particularly they're beautifully written, they have amazing stories, but they maybe don't have like a what you would call like a high concept or like a compelling title you know Um, so I know I've like turned down books by people who have, gone on to have, um, successful careers. And it wasn't a judgment call on their book. It was a judgment call on like, could we make their book a success? Um, we also didn't do a lot of books, so we needed every book to work.
Right. I guess my question is, you being on the other side of the table, we're able to also kind of think a certain way where a typical writer coming into it, oftentimes I think writers just they have an idea, they want to write a book. They don't really think about the business aspect of it. They don't think about how, oh, well, how's this going to be marketable? I mean, what are the comp titles? Like I mean, I guess there were certain kind of things where you kind of saw things in different lights when you were coming then to your own writing. Whereas a typical writer just doesn't really see that because you were the editor and publisher as well.
Right. No, I mean that's true. Like you definitely get when you work in publishing, and it's not a bad job for anyone who's interested in writing. Like if you can get a job with a publisher, you'll learn so much about how books are sold, and you can use what you can use that knowledge to like strategize about what you write. You don't have to do it, but I learned a ton through that job, and I applied some of those lessons to everything I write. You know,
Yeah. So how about writing wise? Is it do you outline, or do you maybe have just a basic idea, or do you just have that? I mean, like, yeah, what's the writing style? I mean, you mentioned before about the new book that's gonna be coming out this fall. It's about 100,000 words. You wrote many, many more words than that. But is it that one of those things where you just you just start writing, you kind of just let the story go, see what the characters do, or do you have a basic outline in mind, or has that changed book to book? I mean, you have the Invisible Fortress, you have Hidden Pictures, you have the new one coming out. And I do want to talk about also a little bit about, I understand that you had also written a book and shopped it around in between Impossible Fortress and Hidden Pictures, which again goes back to this whole thing about good books sometimes just don't even really find homes, which is the story of my life for much of my career. where,
yeah.
for one reason or another, it just this book just isn't right for that publisher, and so on.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, that is the one thing that like I I wish more writers understood. Sometimes like you just like when I was at Quirk, we'd started publishing Grady Hendrix, who was doing horror fiction. So Grady was doing well. We started getting more horror submissions, and I was like, well, I already have my horror author. Like that's the way I looked at it. I was like, well, I already have an author doing this stuff. I don't need another. If I accept all of these, and some of these people have gone on to have very successful careers writing horror fiction, and they probably think I'm an asshole for like rejecting the books, but I wasn't rejecting them because they weren't good. I was rejecting them because we had a small list, we were a small house, and I already had Grady Hendrix, and so I didn't need another person working in this space. What I needed was a good science fiction writer. What I needed was a good mystery or crime writer. Um, and so that's what I was looking for. And so, you know, to writers who are submitting stuff, you can't take the no's. The no's are not always a reflection of your work. Sometimes it's a reflection of what the publisher needs or wants.
Right. So Impossible Fortress comes out. You said it does decently. People who read it really like it. I'm assuming that was just a one book contract with the publisher. It wasn't like a two-book deal. So, okay, so for people who aren't aware, oftentimes writer writes a book, they sell it to the publisher. Sometimes it's just a one book contract. Sometimes they'll sign them up for two books. In that instance, sometimes even with a two-book deal, it does not guarantee the second book gets published, because for whatever reason, maybe sales in the first book don't do well, or for whatever reason, maybe the publisher doesn't like the second book. Anyway, you were out of contract after that first book. You wrote another book and then shopped that around. Again, there's a huge difference between the Invisible Fortress and Hidden Pictures in terms of just even genre wise. I mean, can you tell us? I don't want to spend too much time on it, but like, what type of book was this second book that you wrote?
Well, it's funny. I mean, so Impossible Fortress was this kind of autobiographical teen romance, like coming of age novel, heist novel. And so now you have like a track. And, so I remember talking to my editor, like, what should I do now? And she's like, well, she had good advice. She's like, this is she thought she really liked the emotions that were in Impossible Fortress. She's like, the feelings in this book are like so good. It's such a feel good book. Try to like capture that. So I wrote a book that, um, and I spent a lot of time on this book, at least 2 years. It was pretty long. It was like 130,000 words. I don't want to go too into what it was, but the but the point of the story is that after having my first book published, I wrote another book that nobody wanted. My editor turned it down, and then my agent, God bless him, he sent it off to a bunch of other people. They all turned it down. And I remember, and I kind of know why. Or at least I have my own theories for why. Like, there's a lot in that book that I love, but I think there's a problem with it. There's two problems with it, and I do think it would have been hard to pitch, and it's not the most commercial idea I've ever had. But it's a book that is very rich with emotion, which is what I thought my assignment was. Um, and so, in the wake of that, my agent, God again, God bless him, Doug Stewart, he said, "Look, you just got to write another book," as if it's that easy. I spent like 2.5 years writing this massive epic, ripped my heart out to write it. Nobody wants it, and I thought, well, I guess I have to do this all over again. I'm gonna write another book, and the idea of like just you know going into this thing again alone, it just seemed kind of daunting to me. And I was like, what would be great is if I could collaborate with somebody so I don't have to do this next one by myself. And so I had this idea to do a mystery with illustrated clues. And I didn't really even know what that meant, but I was like, I want to work with an illustrator on something because at least that way I'm not writing a book by myself. I have someone I can call and I can be like, how are the pictures? So I had these really vague parameters of like, there are going to be clues in this book that are going to be clues to a mystery. The art is somehow going to change over the course of the book. I don't know how, but it needs to change to be interesting. Someone in the story is going to be drawing the pictures. It's not going to be decorative. It's not going to look at the publisher commission the art. Like a character in the book has created this art. It's going to be shown like as documentary evidence. And then the last thing is because I had worked in publishing, I knew the art had to be black and white, right? I'm like, no publisher is going to want to do a full color book. It's too expensive to print. So whoever is drawing these pictures in the story is using a pencil or a black pen or maybe a black crayon. And then I spent like 3 months just trying to like brainstorm like stories that sort of fit those parameters. So it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because I would compare it to like writing a sonnet, where like a sonnet can be about anything, right? I knew a lot about the form of hidden pictures. I had all these parameters like outlined in my head. There was going to be art, someone's drawing the pictures, they're going to change over the course of the book. But I'm like, what story works with that? And I considered a lot of really dumb ideas. Like, I'd be embarrassed to tell you some of the really bad ideas I had that I nixed. I had teenagers taking like hallucinogenic drugs to become better artists and things like that. But then one day I was walking down my street and I was like, you know, I don't know. I was trying to think of like how to make it all work, and it just fell out of the sky. And I know it wasn't divine intervention. I know that like it felt like a gift from the heavens, but I think it was the result of like thinking about it for 3 months, and eventually like it just sort of like came up out of my subconscious. I'm like, oh, it's a little boy. He's drawing weird pictures. His babysitter's freaking out, and that's what the book is going to be. And then I wrote the whole thing in 9 months. So
Sorry, my ring light just suddenly got really bright. I have to go turn that down. But let's talk about okay, so once you had the pictures, it's really bright. I gotta go do something with that. But anyway, here's the book. Okay, it's very iconic. Um, Yeah, anybody who has read this, I mean, obviously, kind of, and you and I were talking before, like, I like this is a very compared to the hidden or the hidden compared to the Impossible Fortress. This I would say is a Quirk is a Quirk like book. I mean, this is a book I could see Quirk having published back in the day, with everything going on. The two illustrators that you had working with you, like obviously what's in here are the final, I guess, drafts, but once you actually started, I mean, how many extra, I mean, how many like different maybe drafts of the
Oh,
paintings, or not paintings, but yeah, of the drawings, did you have to go through to really
I
kind of get
saw
to what was there?
I saw 300. So I know there were more than that because they only sent me 300, but like they had drafts. Um, so they did a ton of stuff. And if you get the paperback, I actually put some of the outtakes in the paperback. There's an interview with the three of us, and you can see. I mean, some of the drawings they would do like 30 versions of.
And then were there, so how do I want to say it? So you started writing this story. Obviously, the story came first, but were there certain places where did you ever draw any things, maybe like an outline of like, okay, like this is kind of like what I'm thinking here. This is what I think we should do. And then you kind of gave it to somebody who was maybe a little bit more talented with their art to like make it look even better.
That's exactly what I did. I'd be like, I need a photo of a little girl chasing a rabbit, or an illustration of a little girl chasing a rabbit. So I would do a rough sketch, and it would look terrible because I have no like visual imagination. And then they would do their version of it, and it would be 1,000 times better than what I gave them. And they would think about perspective and angles and things and composition and really, I was thinking of things very literally, very like 2D straight on, and they'd come back with like an overhead, perspective, which never would have occurred to me. Um,
So did you write the entire book first before you got into the art, or did these kind of go hand in hand where you were kind of maybe a couple chapters in, you would send
yeah,
stuff to the art or to the illustrators?
yeah, no, it was the latter. I mean, I was working on it, and they were on board, and I would send them things, and that was great because in terms of confidence, coming off this book that didn't sell, now I'm getting art in that looks amazing. So I'm like, well, look, even if I'm terrible, this book is going to have so much good art in it that people are going to like it. Um, and so that was always like a big boost in my confidence because I was like, well, the art looks amazing. So all you have to do is like, try to get close to the level of the art. Um, and which is exactly what I wanted. That's exactly why I wanted to collaborate with, good illustrators because I knew they would um, keep me going.
And so going back to the question about like knowing the ending or outlining, did you then know early on pretty much how like beat for beat how this book was going to go, how it was going to end,
Not
like
beat for beat, but
the twists?
I knew the secrets. I knew the reveals. Um, so I knew everything. I didn't know how things were going to happen, but I knew all the information, which was great, which made writing it really easy because if you know the answer to your mystery while you're writing, you can work pretty quickly and you can avoid a lot of dead ends and blind alleys.
And obviously, this mostly takes place in a fictional town of Springbrook. Um, but I read somewhere it's actually kind of based on Haddonfield. Is that correct?
Haddonfield, New Jersey. Yeah, it's funny. There's a PTA group, like Parent Teachers Association, and they reached out to me and they're like, "We think this is based on our town, is it?" They're like, "This sounds just like where we live." And I reached back. I said, "Yes, it is. It is Haddonfield." And then they invited me out. We did a great event there. So,
That's great. Yeah. So do you find, because I was talking to some other authors who never really like to create fictional towns or anything. They like, they want to set up. Obviously, in major cities, you don't really have a choice. And I know, like Impossible Fortress, mostly like Philadelphia, if I remember correctly, right?
no, Impossible Fortress is actually set in New Jersey, and it's a
Oh, like
fictional
completely.
town, but no matter.
Well, listening to it's a little bit harder to kind of keep track of certain things. I just remember certain story. But anyway, but okay, well, in that case, was that more of a fictional town as well?
No, that was kind of like a that's a lot like the town in Impossible Fortress is a lot like the town I grew up in. Like we had a little main street with a little shopping district, and there was a stationery store and things like that.
R-
So,
right, but I guess my question is like Springbrook, it's
oh,
yeah.
oh no, I mean that's basically Haddonfield, New Jersey. Like it's a I live in Philadelphia, and sometimes I fantasize about living in Haddonfield because it's so nice. It's beautiful. The streets are clean. It's the suburbs, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I like living in the city because it's there are benefits to the city, but there's also crime, um, and the problems of the city. But I don't know. Sometimes I go out to Haddonfield. They have a great Wegmans. I'll do my grocery shopping there, and I'm like, why don't I live here? It's so nice here. I think it's great. So, um,
Um, so the book is narrated by a Mallory Quinn. She's 22 years old, correct?
that's right.
You were not very close to 22. I guess the
Oh yeah.
question is what like what kind of mindset did you have to put yourself into to do, yeah, because you're coming from well, from your last published book was Impossible Fortress, which was told from the, point of view of a young boy, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, some writers, it seems like they struggle sometimes, going switching not only genres but also switching like the narrators in terms of like of gender. I mean, like
Yeah.
was that did you find that daunting, or I don't know, like what
No,
what
not
was
at
that
all.
process like?
It's so funny. I get emails. I mean, I almost like once a week for people congratulating me as if like it was this amazing achievement, like you wrote in the through the point of view of a woman. But I'm like, I know women. Like I know some, you know. Um, I know 22-year-old women. I have nieces. I mean, I'm married. I have a mother. I have cousins, sisters-in-laws. Um, I would find it much more daunting to write from the perspective of a cop. I don't know any cops. Um, so like I think I would actually find that really hard. A brain surgeon, that would also be like, if I had to write like I don't know.
Yeah,
Women, I'm like, I know, I know hundreds of women,
yeah.
and
No, I
I
mean,
it's the job. It's just like, well, your job is to try to get inside the perspective of someone who's not you, and they may be male, they may be female, they may be young, but they may be old. Um,
yeah,
and what I could, and I had a lot of things in common with her because she had like this sort of she had this working class background that I could really relate to, and she felt very out of her element in this very affluent suburb, which I could relate to. And so, I looked for the things that I had in common with her, and I just sort of leaned into that.
yeah. No, I mean, I totally understand. I also write under a pen name, and those are mostly female driven narrated things. And I just, I can just kind of slip into that, no problem. It doesn't really, just it's just another character you're writing under or like narrating by. But I know that I don't know, some writers sometimes struggle that way. So, uh, you have some Star Wars references in this book. How fun was it coming up with some non-canon titles for these Star Wars books?
You're the first person to ask me about that. It's a very brief reference in one of the scenes. Someone's reading like a sort of Star Wars, like not fan fiction, but one of these like weird license. There's like thousands of Star Wars novels, and so yeah, I did have fun with that, and I just thought it was like a nice quirky thing for this guy who's kind of like an otherwise like kind of a hunky landscaper, and he's like a good looking guy, but he just happens to have a thing for science fiction, like a lot of guys do. So um,
So you write this book, you shop it around. Um, did this go to auction?
there was an auction for that book, yeah, small auction,
Okay.
but
So for anybody who doesn't wear, like usually when we say auction, it means that there's more than one, publisher bidding for the book. They want to publish the book, so they put in offers and they call it an auction. So, um, and obviously you went with Flatiron. Your editor there's Zach. um,
Zach Wagner, yeah.
Zach Wagner. Now, as with
Right.
any book, usually it goes through an editing process. How, I guess my question is, usually when you're doing the editing process, yeah, that goes down to, the actual story or whatever else. You already have all these illustrations. You know what I mean? Like, were there parts where the editing process affected how the art was done, where you had to kind of go back and be like, oh, we need to adjust this or this?
No, I mean, it really wasn't. There weren't a lot of edits to the book. By the time I submitted it, it was so. I mean,
Look
you
at
got to
Jason over
remember,
here bragging about this.
I had written a book that nobody wanted, right? So when
Yeah,
I wrote the book, I was like, this has to be bulletproof. This has to be the most commercial, saleable, perfect thing I've ever done.
I get that. Absolutely.
And or because otherwise, like, and I remember thinking to myself, if this doesn't work, I'm giving up. Like, I'm just not going to try anymore because I can't think of anything more commercial than this book. Like, I was like, I can't do better than this. And so the only real change I made, I remember, and this was Zach was smart to point this out. There was a bit more about Mallory's like daily routine. Like, I was getting into like her babysitting routine and like the routines of like childcare and kind of the tedium of childcare. When you're watching a little child all day long, it can get a little boring sometimes. And so he encouraged me to trim that back. And we also trimmed back the ending, the final section, because he felt like the sort of coda epilogue was going on too long. And so I made some cuts there. That was it, though. We didn't really change. We changed zero illustrations from what we submitted to what appeared in the final book.
Yeah. And our time is actually getting a little bit later. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to talk about the illustrations. So this obviously, like most books, it's available as an audio book. Based on the number of ratings on Audible, it seems to be killing it in audio.
That's great. I haven't
Part
checked.
of
I didn't know.
me, part of me feel, oh yes, several thousand. So yes, several thousand, I think it was like 3 or 4 thousand like ratings and, like I know that not every person who listens to it obviously leaves a rating. So it's anyway, we get into that. I can kind of like, I always kind of feel like there's a ratio that I could probably kind of guess how your audio numbers are. But for a book that has pictures in it, the fact that someone would just want to listen to the audio, I was like, how can you really listen to this audio book? How can you even enjoy this? You tell me. Well, tell us how the audiobook is a little bit different.
Well, it's funny. First, I think a lot of people come to the book and they don't even realize it has pictures. And one thing Flatiron did that I'll never really understand is if you look at the Amazon page for this book, or if you look at the flap copy for that matter, it does not mention that the book has illustrations. And as to go back to the beginning of this conversation, as a publisher, I thought that was a hook. To me, I thought the hook was there's a little boy drawing strange pictures, and you actually see the pictures in the book. They, for whatever reason, I've never asked them about this. They chose to not mention it. So if you were just browsing stuff on Amazon, you would think this is just a regular book, and you might choose to listen to it on audio, not realizing that there are 71 illustrations in it, right? So so a lot of people do that because a lot of people just prefer to listen to books while they're in their car or whatever. And but as we were going to press, the producer of the audiobook called me up. He had this great narrator on board, Susie Jackson. She's incredible. And he said, I realized this book, it might not make complete sense to someone who can't actually see the pictures. And I was like, you're absolutely right. It doesn't. So what I did was I went in just for the audiobook and I added about 3,000 words to the manuscript just to describe the pictures that you would be seeing if you were reading the book. I actually originally had those descriptions in the print manuscript, but I took them out because I thought they were redundant. I didn't want Mallory to find a picture of a goat and have Mallory say, I saw a picture of a goat. He had horns and a bell around his neck. I took all those descriptions out of the print book and I just showed you the goat so that you could just see what Mallory saw and like be in her perspective. But for the audiobook, I went back, I got all those descriptions, I put them back in. Um, and so uh, I don't know that this ever happened in audiobooks before. It might be like the only audiobook I can think of where the manuscript is actually um, slightly different. They're 96% the same, but the audiobook is actually longer and has more words in it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And obviously, it won the Goodreads Award. In our Facebook chat over here, we have Justin says that Hidden Pictures is easily the top 5 horror novels in his opinion. He also says he wants you to send him the novel, the one you couldn't sell. He said send it to him. Um, so real quick, yeah, I don't want to spend much more time. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. I really appreciate your time. I had a note here because I always like to ask people what they're currently reading. I read somewhere that you also like to read a lot of screenplays too. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, not as much as I used to. I guess I was probably reading them a couple of years ago. I don't read as many screenplays as I used to. Um,
Did you find though well, have you written any screenplays?
I wrote a script for Hidden Pictures and I wrote a script for Impossible Fortress, and I sold them both to Netflix. I don't know if either one will ever get made, um, but
Did you
I,
find adapting your own work, like how challenging was that? I mean, did you find it challenging or did you enjoy it?
it was okay. I mean, I did enjoy it. I don't know that I don't know that I will do it again. It's a lot of time, and what you have to understand. I think if you're going to enter that world is that like for every one project that gets made, there probably are 10 or 50 or 100 in development. There's like, I mean, I know screenwriters who they've made a living working as screenwriters and they've never had anything made. They just
Yep.
write things. I mean, I know someone who's, I don't think he's had anything made in the last 20 years, but he always has work and it pays very well. That would drive me crazy.
No,
Right.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so, and at this point in my life, I've just realized I'm like, you know what? The odds of like, if I do a book, I can control exactly what it is, and it will come out, and it will be what I want it to be, and no one's going to interfere with it. And versus movies, if it comes out and it's good and it actually got made, it's like a miracle when that happens, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's so
First.
many things get compromised along the way,
Yeah.
uh, and so you know at this point, I mean, I'm 52, so I'm like, well, I'm going to work for another 25 years. I'm like, I think I'm just going to like focus all my energy on books,
Yeah.
um, because I just feel like that's like my best opportunity to like actually you know share what I'm creating with people without interference. Um,
Yeah. Well, for as tough as publishing is, yeah, film TV is even more brutal. I did in the chat we do have Justin does say he hopes that Hidden Pictures gets made, or it would make an amazing Netflix original. Edith says she hopes it gets made. I know that it was obviously you said Netflix had optioned it. Is there any progress? Is there anything you can talk about, or like they haven't really started anything yet?
and it's probably nothing I should talk about. I mean, they
Okay, we
actually,
don't get you in trouble. We
there
don't want the
is
the Netflix police to show up at your door. That's fine.
there is an actress who is circling it, and they're currently rewriting the script to incorporate her ideas.
Oh
So
boy.
the person would play Mallory, and she's like a pretty like it would be like if she was then satisfied and said yes, this thing would get instantly greenlit because like she's very popular right now.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
well.
and
Fingers
I
crossed.
can't, I can't say any more about that, but like she's super popular,
Yeah.
and she's the right age. So
And then also Justin mentions that we live in such a good time for horror novels. Jason, Paul Tremblay, Ron Malfi, Richard Chismar. It doesn't get better. Um,
I
so
agree.
I actually, and then one real thing. I also read somewhere you had an all-time list of top 5 horror books since we're talking about horror books. That was from like 2 years ago. Do you remember what your top five was at that time? And I want to see how closely it
I
aligns.
mean,
Hopefully it's the same.
I mean, I don't remember, but I mean, like, if you had asked me right now, like, Haunting of Hill House is always on that list. Like, that is like
That's
the
one of them. Yes.
perfect haunted house novel. Um, I'm probably gonna pick a Stephen King, and I don't know why. I know this is not like a popular pick for everybody, but I love the simplicity of Pet Cemetery. I just think it's like this like wonderful. It's so dark, but I just think it's like perfect. I love Rosemary's Baby. That's a book I've read 1,000 times. Ira Levin.
That was the other
Uh,
one. Yep. That was two.
so uh, I no one thinks of Deliverance as a horror novel except for me, the James Dickey novel. But I mean, I think it is horrific. It's horrifying. It's what happens. It's a really bad canoe trip.
That was on
Uh,
there. Yep. Those were the three so far. I got two more.
um,
So the King one that you had on there was The Shining. And again,
uh,
this was from the Mystery Tribune 2022. So the
Shining-
last one, and I was because I don't want to spend more time on this, was Don't Look Now and Other
oh,
Stories by,
Daphne du Maurier.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great collection. That's not a novel, but her short fiction is just
Well, you said, I think, top five horror books, but yeah. So,
it's
okay, real quick, is there anything you can tell us about the book coming out in October? Just like a quick, just, pitch for it.
um I think I have the cover here. Hold on. I can reach over. So it's well, no, this is not going to show up too well. It's called The
Yeah,
Last One at
it
the
shows
Wedding.
some.
And there's nothing supernatural in it. So I wouldn't even call it a horror book. I would call it like a suspense thriller. Um but I I'm really curious to see how people respond. My publisher loves it. Like they're super excited about it. They seem much more excited about it than they were about Hidden Pictures. Um and it's about this you he's a UPS driver. His name is Frank. He lives in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. You know Stroudsburg because you're a Pennsylvania person. And
I grew up in Lampeter.
oh yeah, perfect. So at the start of the story, he finds out page one. He gets a phone call from his adult daughter, who's like 25, and you realize they've been estranged for 3 years. You don't know why they haven't been talking, but they haven't been talking. And she calls to tell him she's getting married, and she wants him to come to the wedding, and she wants him to be there to walk her down the aisle. And he's so happy, he's so excited because he hates that they've been estranged for all this time. So here's this chance to repair the relationship with his daughter. But as he begins to learn about his daughter's fiance and his daughter's fiance's family, he starts to get really, really concerned. And he has these concerns. There are all these like red flags that are like, I mean, no, the big one is that her fiance's previous girlfriend has gone missing. Um, no one knows what happened to her. The last woman this guy dated disappeared, and now he's marrying Frank's daughter. And so he's in this bind because he wants to go to the wedding and be supportive and walk her down the aisle and feel good about this and just enjoy the wedding. But he has these growing concerns and reservations. And most of the book takes place, almost the entire book takes place over a 3-day weekend at the wedding, um, which is at a lake house in New Hampshire. These people are pretty well off. They have this big camp. And he just can't help but sort of, poke his nose into stuff. And and so that's sort of I don't know, I've sort of outlined, I guess, like the first 60 pages to of a 440-page thriller. But that's the engine of the book, you know.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I've seen some arcs floating around. Riley Sager posted one on his Instagram the other day. I ran to my
Yeah.
mailbox. I didn't have an arc in there, so I don't know what that's about. But
Well, there's not an arc yet. What they did was as soon as I turned in the book, they before they even copy edited it, they just printed out bound manuscripts and sent one to Riley. There aren't arcs yet.
yeah,
Um, but I think they're trying to get quotes from famous people to put on the book.
Absolutely. Real quick, Justin does ask, what is your most anticipated books of this upcoming year, if you can say?
Oh gosh, I'll be honest. I have been so busy finishing this last book that I haven't been paying attention to what's coming out. If I thought for a minute, maybe I could think of something. Um, I actually don't know. I don't know. I mean, apart from like the one thing I know I will definitely buy is like I know Stephen King has a new short story collection coming out in like 2 months, I think, called like You Like It Dark. So that's on my radar. I'll definitely read that, whatever it is. Um, I know Grady Hendrix has a new book coming out, but I've already read it because he sent it to me because he wanted my opinion about things. And I've read Riley Stager's book, which is great. Um, but I've been so caught up in writing that I haven't been looking at. I know there are these lists like the most excited books of 2024, but I haven't looked at them. Um, so so I'm not sure.
Oh. Well, how about then, like the last, is there any recent books you read that you would recommend?
Um, Yeah, I just read 3 books on vacation, but I'm trying to remember what they were. I just came back from Puerto Rico.
I followed you on Instagram, so I know at least one of them was the First Lie Win because I messaged you
Is that
about it
great? Yeah,
because I enjoyed that one too.
yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah.
Ashley Elston, debut adult thriller, #1 New York Times bestseller. I was like, I've got to see what this is. Like, what did she do? Um, but it's super twisty and it's full of like twists and double crosses. Um, oh, I also read a really good book. Most people don't know this one because it didn't sell that well, but so I can give a shout out to it's a book called Small Town Sins, and I'm gonna mispronounce the writer's last name because I don't know how to say it. It's something like Ken Jaworski. Um, and it is about a firefighter who finds a bunch of money in a house. And it has like, and he's in also it's a Pennsylvania book. He's in small town Pennsylvania. And it has like echoes of A Simple Plan, the Scott Smith novel, which is one of my all-time favorite thrillers. Like I think A Simple Plan is just it's like one of the all-time great thrillers. Um, and this book reminded me of that book. Um, this guy Ken, he has a way of. It's a dark book. It's really dark. If you don't like dark stories, don't read it. But if you do, and you like Simple Plan, you probably like Small Town Sins. He really knows how to end the chapter on a cliffhanger. I found myself admiring that. I was like, oh my god! Like every time you get to the end of the chapter, I want to go to bed, but I gotta read one more. So
Awesome.
small. And
Well,
it's let me just say it's the reason I mentioned it. He's nominated for an Edgar Award. So even though I don't think it sold a ton. Um, some people at the Mystery Writers of America recognized that what he's doing is pretty unique and pretty good. And so I was thrilled that he got nominated for that, and I hope he wins. The awards I think are May 1st, May 1st. So
yeah. And we also had another question from Heidi, basically asking, do you think Netflix will be interested in the new book story? I mean, have you, now the book's been completed, are you guys going to be shopping that around or waiting until the book comes out for film TV?
um, I don't really know how it works. I mean, I have an agent who like sells these things, and I think he is shopping it around, but um, you know, as to whether or not anyone's going to buy it,
Yeah,
I,
that
it's so
happens.
out of my control. But I think it would make, like all my books, I think it would make a wonderful movie. Um,
So since we're getting into, I don't want to spend, I appreciate your time, but you mentioned that with writing a script for Hidden Pictures. For me, I would view that more as like a limited, like I think you could like, do like 6, 7 episodes of that. Did you write the script of more for like for like a 2 hour movie?
yeah, I wrote it as a movie. It drives me crazy, but I think most things are too long nowadays. I think movies are too long. I hate that movies are like 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's like the norm now. And I really don't like it when I see thrillers that are like 8 hours. Um, because look, Gone Girl, amazing thriller. David Fincher managed to do Gone Girl in 2 hours. If you can do Gone Girl in 2 hours, you can do anything in 2 hours because that book is so complicated.
This is
Uh,
true, and the author actually wrote that screenplay too. So she managed to do it. It's certainly possible, but I just there's just a
Gone Girl
lot going on here in
Gone
this
Girl in
book.
8 hours would be terrible, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, oh, it's so much better in 2 hours. It's tight, it's all killer, no filler. And so with Hidden Pictures, I had no interest in doing it as a series. And with this new book, I mean, not that I'm going to adapt it because I think, like I said, I think I'm kind of done with it. I'd rather just write another book. Um, I would do it as a just to do it as a movie, you know, 2 hours, tell the story, in and out. But that's just what I
So
like.
and then so real quick, so the cover here, which I think right now at this point it's been everywhere, so it's pretty iconic. Was this was this the original idea or concept for the cover? Because this isn't an illustration that takes place inside of the, of any of the illustrations, although it's, again, it kind of plays into certain things. Or like, were there other ideas, or like, how did this cover come about?
You know, the designer is an amazing talent, a guy named Will Staley, and he's someone that I'm friendly with, and he did do the interior illustration, or he did half of the interior illustrations. Um, but yeah, I actually thought the cover would look. I will grab what I thought the cover would look like. Um, I will show you. This is the Italian edition, and they changed the title to Teddy, but this is what they did for their cover. And I kind of thought the cover would look like this. You know, like when I was pitching this book, I thought, of course, you were going to put Teddy's art right on the cover. What else would you do? And I'm just speculating here. I don't know that this is true. I think this is just too out there for Flatiron. I think they were like, they are like a mainstream commercial publisher, and they're like, well, we want to do a book that looks like the other thrillers on the marketplace. And that's a perfectly valid idea. Like it's smart, it's safe. Like do that. There's no thrillers that look like this. Um, so among the many great ideas that like Will sent to them, they landed on that one because they thought, wow, it looks great as dynamite, and you do get a little bit of Teddy's drawings in the titles because you can see like on the if you hold it up again, you'll
Yeah.
see like there's
Yeah. You have
version.
you have
There are
the
little
pictures
pictures like
and yeah.
but I thought they would do more explicit and just actually have it be like more representative of the book.
That
And
reminds
that's
me of like a horror version of the cover for Room. Do you remember the cover for Room?
yeah, the cover of Room is dynamite. It's a great cover. Emma Donahue. Um, this book, I've sold it in like 30 languages. In Italy, it was a national bestseller in Italy. I mean, I hear from Italians every day on Instagram, and I think it has to do with this cover. Like, I think like they just freaking nailed the cover, and they also did a lot of really fun things with the production of the book. Like, there's art like on the inside of the flaps.
Oh,
They do this in like European countries, not in the United States so much.
yeah.
There's like a nice texture to the book. Um, so bravo, Italia. I love it. Um,
All right, Jason, you have been so kind with your time. I know we went over. We had one last question, which goes back to the last one at the wedding. Signed copies. Is there any plan? I know that you'll probably be going on tour, but is there any plan with any independent bookstores that you work with, or will there be signed copies available for people who
yeah,
want
I
signed
mean, there
copies?
definitely will be. I need to figure out how to do that. I need to find a store that will like let me come by and like sign books.
Yeah.
And one of the problems is like living where I do in Philadelphia. You wouldn't think this, but like there aren't a lot of like great indie bookstores like in my neighborhood. There were a couple and they kind of went out of business. Um, so I need to approach. There are some really good ones in the suburbs that I go out to, like Inkwood Books, which is in Haddonfield again, New Jersey. But it takes me like 45 minutes to get there. Main Point Books in Wayne is another 45 minutes. So I just need to find. I'm kind of thinking out loud with you as I try to solve this problem. I need to figure it out, but I'm going to do it. In the meantime, though, I do. If anybody wants what I do is I send out these stickers. They're book plates. They have a picture of Anya, the monster from Hidden Pictures. Um, anybody who sends me a self-addressed stamped envelope to my PO box, uh, I'll send you Hidden Pictures swag back. I just ask that they send the envelope because it makes it easier for me to, keep track of everything.
All right, perfect. So again, Jason, thank you so much for hanging out. Where can people find you online on social media? I know the answer,
The
but other people
Instagram,
don't.
yeah, Instagram. It's just my name, Jason Rekulak at Instagram. I put all my updates there, and so more to
All
come. I
right.
know I'm going to be posting. I'm going to be embarrassed by how much I post this year when this new book comes out, but I'll be posting like crazy.
You got to promote. Absolutely. So the current book is Hidden Pictures. New book coming out this fall. Last one at the wedding. Everybody, if you can, please pre-order. Pre-orders are huge. I know as an author, I say that, and I still find myself not pre-ordering books. And I always have to tell myself, no, I need to pre-order books if I really am, excited about a book. So, Jason, again, thank you so much for hanging out, everybody. See you next time. Bye.